That's why Tom Petty said the waiting's the hardest part. What's going on, everybody? This is the Cover Band Confidential Podcast, the podcast for cover band musicians and band leaders to learn how to rock more and suck less. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson.
In Greensboro, North Carolina, I'm Dan Ray.
Sometimes, the train doesn't leave the station. We had a hard time getting the beginning of this podcast recorded for some reason.
And a 1 and a 2 and
Yeah. That's why they pay us the. How are you, Dan?
Well, let's not talk about the Bucks. I'm good. Yeah, it's been a pretty quiet week over here. Not a ton going on. We got a gig on Saturday. This coming week from yesterday. We record on Sundays, so a week from yesterday, and it's with the band that currently has a bassist who it's hard to get to a rehearsal because she lives an hour and a half away, and that's tough.
Right.
So this show is going to be all muscle memory. It's going to be the set list is entirely stuff we know we can nail without thinking too hard about it. Which I guess it's good when your set list is like that. I mean, sometimes I've had some fun times when we were out on a tightrope without a net at a show, but that's not going to be this one. This would be all the safe ones this week.
Sometimes, I don't know, going out and just hitting home run after home run probably is not a bad thing to do.
Yeah, not the end of the world, for sure.
So let's see. In my world, we'll get to what happened over this past weekend in a minute. But the big thing was I got that holiday party finally locked down.
Nice.
Money's in the account. It's good to go. This is one of those weird situations where sometimes the payday versus the amount of effort, it seems to be inversely proportional.
Yeah.
So a lot of times these high-end deals, you don't really have to, there's not a whole lot of information. They just kind of want you to do what you normally do. This holiday party was kind of like a deal where we came in with a price that was double what they had been quoted from the other band. We kind of met in the middle, but kind of on the lower end of what we normally do. And just a lot of back and forth, more back and forth than probably any other gig this year.
Yeah.
So, it is just kind of interesting how the way that works sometimes.
The kind of thing that makes you want to charge by the email.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
This is where, if people are like, well, what are you doing in that 10% booking these gigs? I was like, well, let me show you what that 10% looks like this week, at least.
Yeah, not every week.
But it's all good.
But this week.
Yeah, I mean, the next hurdle for that is I sent out a song survey because, remember, I was kind of like, I'm not sure what they're looking for, and I'm worried that whatever we're about to do, we're about to not do it well. And they sent back a very, very wide request list. It was 50 plus songs from Donna Summer to the emo pop punk stuff. It is all over the place.
Okay.
So we're going to start kind of chipping away at those tunes to make sure we've got, a solid set list with probably, I don't know, whatever the stuff that we don't play will probably end up just kind of being audibles in the moment. Maybe the room's kind of shifting. So
sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I love a good challenge. And this is the one that's, walking distance from my house. So
yeah,
that's the best part about it. I can just walk home if I need to. Like the last time we played in that area, I forgot the set lists and I just went and walked and back to the house and got them. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, I like that. There was a time I was playing twice a week, and both were about a mile and a half either direction from my house. It was very low risk to leave the house because it's trivial to get back home if you forgot something. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, versus one of those 3-hour gigs where you got to just really go through the checklist.
Yeah, you're just up a creek after that.
Yeah, and Google the nearest Guitar Center because you're gonna forget something.
Well, you know what you guys didn't forget? To leave a review.
Yeah.
So this one comes from Apple Podcasts. And it says it's a 5-star one because that's the only ones that we get these days is 5 stars because that's, that's the quality.
Yeah.
That's the level of just,
professionalism.
We're only giving out the good stuff.
Yeah.
This one says essential content for those who gig. I found the Cover Band Confidential podcast a couple of weeks ago and have been listening to past episodes almost every day since. I'm so sorry. As a gigging musician, I find the content extremely useful and the shared experience of Adam and Dan to be spot on with experiences I've had myself. I love all of the advice and tips to help make our lives and experiences easier. Thanks again. And it's Lane Miles, and you can find him at Lane Miles Music, all one word. I'm assuming on Instagram. Thanks, Lane, for the kind words. If you would like to hear us shout your, social media to dozens of people, you can leave a review, and we'll say it.
Yeah.
We're real good about it. Okay, now that we're on to the next one, we have a little bit of a gear segment. We've been talking about some stuff.
Yep.
And why don't you go ahead, because I feel like you've been teasing this one out for a bit.
Well, and it's this week's yet another tease. So there's this device that I actually bought after its Kickstarter was over. I think in a previous episode, I was confused about the timeline of that. I couldn't quite remember whether I was a backer in the Kickstarter or just after. It was, in fact, just after. So some of them are landing and mine has not yet quite. But the device is called Maestro DMX. And the idea is it listens to audio and with AI understands the structure of it and is able to predict movements in it and then drive a light show over DMX out to your devices. And some of the early backers have been getting theirs. They actually, a couple people received them a day or two earlier than they expected. So the Facebook group about it has been very, very busy. But ironically, despite the last month or so, people like hanging from the rafters demanding video and demo and whatnot that the company's not been giving and beta users have not been putting out because of they were still under NDA. Yeah, these early users have not been flooding the place with videos. So those of us who haven't gotten yet are dying.
But speaking of users who have gotten them, Ando from the Patreon Slack group,
That's right.
He got his.
Yes.
He was supposed to be trying it out with his band Anti-Skip Protection this weekend.
That's right.
And we've been very eagerly just waiting.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about it?
Yeah, real eager to see. There was somebody who played some classic rock into it, into a 4-bar like thing. It wasn't a Chauvet, it was somebody else. But what it produced was pretty credible, and I would not be embarrassed to have it over my head. As I was playing that music, it looked a whole lot better than my Chauvet 4-bar set on random. A whole lot better. Yeah. So pretty excited about that. In theory, it gets here next Sunday, a week from today. And my plan is to, after my gig on Saturday next week, to bring my lighting gear home and set it up and play with it some. Maybe in this episode, maybe in next week's episode, I'll have something to say about it.
Well, it's kind of timely because we're talking about the things that we're looking at to improve the quality of our shows and that kind of thing. And I finally bit the bullet with Joey, our guitar player's jostling to get into MIDI automation for my HX Stomp.
Right.
I gave him the login to Band Helper, and he downloaded the app. And basically every other day, I get like a text like, "Oh, it does this." I'm like, "Yeah, man, it does do that. Like it does too much. Yeah, it does more than it should."
Right.
But he was asking about MIDI presets because it's something that you can very easily put into your Band Helper files. And oddly enough, the HX Stomp has a really easy system of changing presets. So I was able to very quickly put down I can't remember I think it's a scene change or a program change for all of my presets. And then as I was going through this last week's set, I was just adding the presets to that song. I know, well, I play an acoustic on this one and I play, kind of a mid gain on this one. You literally go through, you hit a drop-down menu, and when the music director loads the song, it snaps everybody to the right preset. It's pretty rad.
Awesome.
And it took very little time to set up. So
that's cool.
If that's not something that you've looked into and you are a Band Helper and or an HX Stomp user, you should absolutely look into that because it was way easier than I was anticipating.
Talk a little about the hardware between the iPad and the HX Stomp.
So in this case, this was just proof of concept. I was just doing it because the HX Stomp does MIDI over USB. I was able to configure it pretty quickly. Regarding how we are going to do it on stage, the easiest thing to do would be just MIDI through from the interface, kind of like link all of the boxes together. But there's if I even if I just had
daisy chaining 5-pin MIDI or 8-pin MIDI,
like MIDI in and MIDI through,
yeah,
and maybe put my board back behind me so I don't really need to mess with it too much.
Yeah, because you can automate. You can automate changes within a song too, right?
I could, and I don't really futz with the presets once I start playing, so it may not even be necessary to do that. Like it would allow me to have more elaborate setups, but I don't really need that necessarily.
Yeah.
So I'm not really worried about that so much, but you can do this MIDI command over Wi-Fi. You can do it over Bluetooth. There's a whole WIDI ecosystem that I could set up, and we haven't really landed on it. It was more of just a proof of concept and get everything set up so it actually would work. But yeah, I'm looking through all of the different options that we've got, and the most reliable would be to set up like a legitimate standalone MIDI network. And iConnectivity, which does the Play Audio 12-hour playback system, they have that ecosystem built in to those, and you can get these little satellite boxes that you can plug MIDI in, and it's all sent via Cat5.
Nice.
It's really cool. It feels like overkill, might be overkill, but
yeah. Well, I mean, you say you don't futz with your preset. I mean, I'm always kicking over to at least a lead tone or something in the middle of most songs, or some anyway. I don't stick on.
Yeah.
I can't. It's hard to think of a tune I stick on the same sound for my whole song. But if you got something doing track automation that can have a trigger in it that could fire, a particular patch to turn on or something.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they make it super easy. Like if I set up snapshots for my songs,
Yeah,
it would take hardly any time at all to automate that into
it's very
the
cool.
gig.
It's very cool.
I still like I don't use them. I'm real boring
What?
because I'm the rhythm guy. I'm like
Right. Fair.
I might kick a delay on every now and then, but like it's not make or break. The hardest part that I have is like when we're switching from songs and I've got to go from a really heavy tone to like an acoustic tone. If I'm doing it myself, I have to hit the rocker button like 5 times real quick
Yep.
to make sure I hit the one. Like that's not always happening. So
Right.
it'd be nice to just be like, there it is.
Yeah.
That'd be rad.
That's cool.
So yeah, MIDI, like I've always been afraid to jump into it, but I've done it. I've jumped.
I have seen a bunch of hardware that like plugs into the 2 MIDI ports, but then is really wireless and is talking on a Wi-Fi.
Yeah, it
or
was like
Bluetooth
Witty is what there's. I think Roland, somebody owns the rights to Witty. I don't know who it is, but it's its own kind of thing. But yeah, you just like plug a bunch of those in between devices, and they should all sync.
Yeah,
it's all about should.
Yeah, well, and I mean it's always should with wireless.
Of course,
no matter how reliable it's proven itself to be, I never trust it fully. But yeah, cool.
So that kind of wraps everything up. We've done all the housekeeping things. So Dan, we've been at this a long time, and I feel like they're ready to hear about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the topic or the subject of the podcast came from a conversation on the Slack where we were kind of lamenting the ebb and flow, and somebody said, you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. So this is about the facts of life.
Facts of life.
Being a working musician or in a band.
Yep.
So this year has been a year of firsts. We've had some really great shows. Like we played that massive municipal event where it was like 2,000 plus people and like had the night of our lives. Everybody had a blast. It was really, really fun. We had this really awesome, huge payday gig that, we made more money in one day than we've ever made in our entire careers. And that was like, these are these huge milestones. And this past weekend, we hit another milestone, and that was we canceled a show because the ticket sales just weren't where they needed to be. And that is the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah.
In my world, ever. And it was a weird conversation, but like the reality is that sometimes you've got the wind to your back and there's not a lot of stuff going on. And maybe you've got a little more attention. And so like it's easy to sell tickets, and other times you just can't. Like this was one of those weird situations where I did all of the things that I did at the last one that I made a whole video about it. Does doing the in-person like physical promotion make an impact? And we had this awesome turnout. So I did the same thing. I made more flyers. I actually, it's the first time I've ever done paid ads. I sat with Mike Schulte and, kind of did a mind meld with his techniques and what he suggests, and put a couple $100 down and got great results if you're talking about exposures and, clicks onto the page, but just didn't convert. And so instead of trying to play to a half empty room and the venue potentially not make a ton of money, we just were like, I guess in that scenario, being a good partner with the venue is saying, hey, let's try and reschedule this to a better weekend. And,
right.
We'll figure this out.
Right. And it makes you feel like, well, what we talk about this thing called getting momentum.
Yeah.
Like where's that? We've just coming off of these successes.
Right. But it is just like that. There is no correlation.
Right.
All of these things can be, and they're true. All of those things are true. All of those things happened, and they don't necessarily mean anything together or separately.
Right.
There are definitely things that led to these opportunities occurring, but ultimately, like, everybody's going to run into a situation where you feel like things are going well, and then something happens.
Yeah.
It's just the way things go,
Yeah. There's no accounting for an individual data point.
Right.
It doesn't, an average that's so much bigger than one data point, you can't really extrapolate as you look at the one data point.
Well, and then you start doing all these weird postmortems. Well, it's like, well, there was a Georgia game, the biggest one, which I had no idea, was Morgan Wallen was playing down the road in a stadium, like a literal baseball stadium.
Yeah.
So, but we didn't know that when we booked the date out.
For sure.
You can't account for those kinds of things all the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, the fact about it was just, it wasn't our night.
Right.
And so, we decided to call it, and it wasn't great.
No.
I didn't love it.
No.
I would prefer not to. I would have loved to have played that show, but it was the right call to make. in a less than optimal situation.
Yeah. And so, relatedly, in a similar kind of vein, my number of bookings this year is down. I will say, having a member move an hour and a half away impacted the feeling of momentum for the rest of us. That was impactful. It's also true. I really do think there's something macroeconomic going on right now. I think revenge travel, revenge party, like all of this, COVID's over, we can go out and go nuts. Because you remember how it was when finally the walls came down. It was suddenly everybody was out and rooms were packed and it was crazy and they couldn't get enough of us. And we were booked more than we wanted in some cases. And and I really feel like that, for sure, that wave has passed and we may be in a trough following that, because frankly, the booking energy I'm feeling out there is not strong. And I don't mean this to be pity party. I don't mean it to be explanation, because I can also point to, like, look, I haven't been out beating the bushes every weekend like I might have been.
Beating the bushes? Like, what are you doing?
I'd go to the bar and I'd get a beer and then I'd beat the bushes. Don't you? Isn't that how you do it? I think it's like I've talked about
maybe that's how y'all do it in North Carolina.
Have I left that part out of my process? I've talked about my process so many times. Have I forgotten about the part about the bushes? Holy crap.
No.
Well, the point is, let me just put it like this: my sales engagement has not been super high, and part of that is because of how I've felt about how the band has been. There's like the personal side of all that, but I also really think there's even reaching out to folks who, in the past, has been like, hey, we're out, we've used up all the dates we booked. Like, let's look at the next quarter. And they'd open their calendar right up. That energy isn't what I'm experiencing right now. So I'd be really interested out there if you guys are experiencing the same kind of thing, like that there's a feeling in the air that we're in. And look, so maybe the economy's not so great. Maybe there's a lot of reasons why people might be belt tightening in a general kind of way. And I'd be interested to see if you feel like that's hitting where you are, because I think it is, even the traffic of gig announcements I see on Facebook, way down from even how it was 6 months ago, let alone a year ago, let alone 4 years ago. So I think it'd be just interesting to correlate across markets to see if we think we're feeling that broadly. And then, do you let that be your excuse why you can't book, or do you have that put wind in your sails to go out there and be the ones who are going to conquer in the face of it, right? So that's the second question after we sort of understand the broader conditions out there.
Yeah, and I mean, from my standpoint, members only is hitting the 10-year mark.
Right.
And so this band has seen a lot of stuff. The market has changed considerably over the course of that. And sometimes it's temporary, but it's important to look at things in a macro view.
Yep.
You have to kind of separate yourself from how you feel in the moment to what does this look like? Is this just kind of an aberration? And, I could sit here and I could dwell on all of the negative things that have happened this year because, that's kind of what this podcast is.
Can be.
But the intent is that you take this thing and you're like, all right, well, something not great happened. What can other people learn from this not great thing?
Right.
So maybe they can avoid it. But it's just, it is what it is. And it's good to be honest with yourselves about why some things didn't go the way that they were supposed to. But you also have to be willing to go, maybe we had nothing to do with it.
Right.
Maybe there wasn't a piano fell on our head and that's all there is to explain it,
Yep. There is an old Russian proverb I like a lot that goes, some days you eat the bear, some days the bear eats you.
Mine is some days you're the hammer, some days you're the nail.
Yeah.
I feel like I've used that one a lot.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you're the nail. The important thing is what you do after you get nailed. Man, we are not, the wordplay in this episode is terrible.
It's not going great. Yeah. What happens after the bear eats you?
I've now completely lost my train of thought. Maybe I'll cut this out. Maybe I won't. Maybe this is just as good of an indicator.
I think, I think it speaks to where we're, because, we don't really have answers about this.
Yeah.
Right. We're kind of experiencing a slow period, or a period where it seems like momentum was headed one way and then there was a surprise and it's hard to know quite what to make of that. So, yeah,
there's been some conversations in our camp about the 80s space right now, and that it may kind of just be on the tail end of a nightlife kind of scenario for some people.
Yeah.
And so there's been some talk about pouring more effort into different material, like kicking back up the 90s version of the group and maybe try to spread that out a bit more and just kind of cover our bases in a different kind of space. Because if you're looking at people who, I mean, I was an infant in 1981. The folks that were old enough to remember that stuff, you know, they're just in a particular part of their lives where maybe they're not going out to bars and clubs, and
Right.
maybe we need to kind of create a club friendly act that kind of keeps our name out there and still do the things that we would normally do for those kinds of crowds. Like municipal events, 80s is easy because, you know, it's an early night, it's a free event, it's down the road. There are a lot less barriers you have to go through in order to get to that kind of situation versus like a club date where you're out till 3.
Sure. And there's content that's timeless, that includes stuff from the 80s and includes a lot of other, you know, it's not like decade bound.
Right.
You've gone all in or a good ways in on the 80s thing. And it's interesting to think that maybe at this point, demographically, that's starting to become a limitation.
Yeah. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't, but it's worth having the conversation.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if we went to the trouble of doing those things, the brand would benefit. Because if nothing else, it's higher name recognition, it's more opportunities. And there are a couple of groups that are doing these like 80s versus 90s. And we kind of did that, not necessarily in that branding, but we did the Fanny Pack Friday where it was like a mix of the two.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe that's the route we go and we just tweak the branding a little bit. There's so many different things that we can try. I mean, just like anything else, we're in a small business. We're going to try and iterate. We're going to innovate. We're going to try new things. We're going to see if they work. And if they don't work, we'll try something else.
Right.
I mean, it's this constant process that we're just, again, I can't not talk like we aren't in software development.
I know. Well, it's because, you know, that was the first place that it was really expensive to assume that your first thought was the right one.
Yeah, we're doing a 90s band sprint.
Yeah.
And then we'll...
Yeah, exactly. You do a retro and make a plan for the next sprint. That's how that works.
Yep. So if you have found yourself in a certain situation, just know that you have to look at this holistically. So if you've had, or if we're talking like the kids, if you've had more L's than W's, just know that typically that's a season. It's a thing that typically you'll find your way out of. And so don't necessarily read into it more than you need to.
Yeah.
But be willing to have the conversations, think about what you have control over, and adjust if necessary.
Yep. And know that the one thing you always have control over is your response. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
I
think that's
we probably ought to do an episode that's like Scrum for cover bands at some point here.
Is that what this world's been missing? Is that the book that we need to release?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Well, I think that's a good thing to wrap up on. Hopefully we can come back with something a bit more uplifting, but
yeah.
I don't think having a sober conversation about the reality of this marketplace and this line of work is necessary. I mean, we have to do it.
For sure.
We have to call it out for what it is and when it happens.
Absolutely. And it's only bad news if you don't learn from it.
Absolutely. So what you do when you get knocked down is what you do after you get back up. All right, folks, we'll go ahead and call it for that one.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you have any other like hard topics you want to hear us talk about, hit us up, coverbandconfidential@gmail.com.
Or if you want to commiserate about what you're seeing in your market, if you're like, we'd love to hear if you were like, oh my God, no, it's gangbusters over here. Let us know that.
Yeah. Or if you want to have like an ongoing conversation about all of this stuff, hit up the Patreon.
Yep.
We got folks from all over. We got Australia and England and every corner of the US, like lots of perspective.
Yep.
Lots of folks, you know, able to kind of give you the real deal and shoot you straight if you need it, or gas you up if you don't.
Exactly.
We're here for all kinds. Thanks again, everybody. If you want to support the show any other way, you can do what Mike's about to tell you. Otherwise, I'll go and call it for this week. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson.
In Greensboro, North Carolina, I'm Dan Ray.
You've been listening to the Cover Band Confidential podcast for the week of November 17th, 2023.